Hey guys, welcome back to Sports Tea. Tonight we're going to chop it up about Anthony Edwards saying that MJ was the only skilled player back in the days, which is kind of crazy. But before we start, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Feel free to drop your thoughts in the comment section as well. So, as you all know, Anthony Edwards had an interview with the Wall Street Journal, and he's been trending this week for his comments about the older generation of basketball. Stephen A. Smith replied, lots of reactions all over the sports world, but I thought that Stephen A. summarized his comments very well, and he gave a pretty interesting opinion. So let's hear what he had to say.
All right, Hollywood Steve. In his recent interview with the Wall Street Journal, Anthony Edwards was asked how his generation compares to the ones before him and said, quote, "I didn't watch it back in the day, so I can't speak on it. They say it was tougher back then than it is now, but I don't think anybody had skill back then. Michael Jordan was the only one that really had skill. You know what I mean? So that's why when they saw Kobe, they were like, oh my God. But now everybody has skill." Stephen A. Smith. Are Ant-Man's comments out of bounds?
Of course, they're out of bounds. Forgive the young buck for what he does not know. He openly admits his youth comes into play, and he's barely seen the older competition from back in the day. So he just doesn't know. Evidently, he talked about Michael Jordan. He didn't see Charles Barkley play. He didn't see Larry Bird play. He didn't see Isaiah Thomas, one of the most skilled point guards this game has ever seen, a person that Michael Jordan has called the second greatest point guard in the history of basketball, behind one Irvin Magic Johnson himself, who Ant Edwards did not mention. So you take those things into consideration. Don't get me started with Larry Bird. I already threw that up in there. I can go back, and when you look at shooters, for example, as great as Steph Curry is, because he's the greatest of all time, wipe Steph Curry out of the mix. Then bring in some of the great shooters in NBA history, the Ray Allens of the world, the Reggie Millers of the world, the Allen Houstons of the world. I can go back to the days of Dale Ellis, Ricky Pierce, and guys like that. I remember downtown Freddie Brown, for crying out loud. There's some people to point to. I remember Andrew Toney at the off-guard spot, Mr. Mid-Range. We think about DeMar DeRozan. Go back and watch some highlights of Andrew Toney as a Philadelphia 76er. Why'd you look up Mark Aguirre and what he used to do on the basketball court, and Adrian Dantley and others? There's so many names that you can point to. Certainly the game has evolved, and in terms of parity, there's more talent in the NBA today that once existed, but that's entirely different than saying, well, Michael Jordan was the only skilled players. Let's go to the center position. Nikola Jokic is sensational. He is something special. Make no mistake about it. Joel Embiid cannot be ignored. I get all of that. You ever heard of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar? You ever heard of Wilt Chamberlain? You ever heard of these guys? You understand what I'm saying? Shaquille O'Neal, excuse me. He came after them, but still, he wasn't in the Ant-Man era. You look into the most dominant force I've seen in my lifetime. There's so many things to think about and look at. And so you can look and appreciate today's players, understand that there's an elevated level of talent because they piggyback off the talent that preceded them, the pioneers that came before them. But that's not to sit up there and summarily dismiss the older generation and what they brought to the table and how innovative and tremendously talented as they were. And oh, by the way, let me not forget, even before Kobe Bryant, there was a guy by the name of Vince Carter, the best in-game dunker in the history of basketball. And you know that Ant Edwards is one of my top two favorite players in the NBA, him and Steph Curry. Let me tell you something right now. It's phenomenal as Ant Edwards is and is going to be, even with his best dunks. I would ask Anthony Edwards to go back and watch Vince Carter dunk during a game. Watch the show this brother put on. Go back and watch Tracy McGrady and what Tracy McGrady did on the basketball court. I'm just saying.
Stephen A. Smith nailed it. I also thought that he gave a very balanced opinion. He wasn't too hard on Anthony Edwards, which honestly, as ignorant as the interview was and those statements were that he made, I'm on the side of he really just doesn't know and wasn't sure what to say. So, Stephen A., he mentioned Charles Barkley, Larry Bird, Isaiah Thomas, who, by the way, got us kind of into this mess by the infighting that he's been having with his own, players from his era. Magic Johnson, downtown Freddie Brown, Andrew Toney, Adrian Dantley, Kareem, Wilt, Shaq, Vince Carter, the best in-game dunker that I've ever seen in my life. I mean, and it's up for debate. Obviously, you have Dominique Wilkins, like you had a lot of really great in-game dunkers, but Vince Carter was something else. Penny Hardaway, Grant Hill, Tracy McGrady. I mean, what the hell? These are all skill players. So let's just go all the way back to 1980. A player by the name of World Be Free, he used to go by Lloyd Free, but he changed his name legally. And he dropped over 30 points on Larry Bird's head in the Celtics. I'm going to show you guys just a little highlight video of World Be Free. Let's see this. Alrighty, so World Be Free. He played for San Diego Clippers, and obviously they weren't the team that the Celtics were. But the game was within 5 or 6 points through the third quarter before the Celtics took over the game that I watched. And I got to tell you, no one could guard World Be Free on this team. I'm talking double pump mid range and 3-point jump shots. I barely saw guys jump in the air, pumping their arms and legs in today's game because it's less likely the shot will be made. It's not the best shooting form, but look at his skills mixed with the athleticism. This guy, World Be Free, formerly known as Lloyd Free, he always turned a losing team into a winning team. And boy, was he pretty good. I mean, you guys just saw it. No skill? Looked like he had skill to me. Admittedly, Ant-Man never saw these guys play. And he says he couldn't really speak on it, but he went ahead and spoke on it anyway. So that's why this interview has been trending. You're speaking on something you don't know. Of course, it's going to blow up into the, NBA world and sports world, and people are going to be talking about this. I almost felt bad for Anthony Edwards because it seems like he was fed the opinions, that he had no way to research or vet himself. He was fed these opinions by maybe some elder statesmen, by maybe his big homies on the Olympics team, who knows? But he's clearly being brainwashed to believe that today's game is the only basketball that matters. And the entire 75 years of basketball history was trash. Like, how could he say that only Michael Jordan had any skill? What's so interesting to me about that comment is that it just proves how great Michael Jordan actually was. That he literally erased everyone around him. When we talk about Michael Jordan, everyone around him was quote unquote a plumber and a fireman. The plumber narrative, it started about 2 years ago during a fiery debate between Mad Dog Russo and JJ Redick on First Take. It was so bad that they had to immediately cut to break. Let's hear it.
Free throws at Oklahoma City. He lost that series when he was on the Clippers. Missed 4 free. Was it 2 or 4?
No. It was. I was on the team. It was
he missed
a
some
turnover.
Free throws.
He fouled Russell Westbrook, and then he turned it over on the last play.
He missed 2 free throws.
There was no free throws involved.
How about last year in one of the games against Milwaukee? Didn't he have 5 points in Game 5 against the Bucks and was awful in a game?
Okay.
If you are an NBA Hall of Famer.
What about the entire Lakers series where he couldn't shoot a basketball? Physically couldn't raise his shoulder and arm above his head, and he gutted it out and beat the Lakers.
I give him. He did the good.
So does he get credit for that? Does he get credit for that?
Putting him on this level of the all-time greats. When you put him on the level of the all-time greats, you can't have these kind of games.
Is he an all-time great, JJ?
You can't put.
He's absolutely an all-time
point guard.
He's an all-time great point guard.
Without question.
He wins a championship, he's in the conversation for the greatest point guard ever. I'm not saying
he's not. Greatest point guard. He's not Bob Cousy. He's not Bob Cousy.
Bob Cousy couldn't dribble with his left hand.
Bob Cousy changed the game. Chris Paul didn't change the game.
Bob Cousy won championships when there were 8 teams in the NBA and you had to win 2 playoff series.
Guys,
let's celebrate Bob Cousy in his era, but you can't compare pre-1980 with
yes, you can.
With the modern NBA. No, you cannot.
Well, how about Weston Oscar? Can you compare Cousy with Weston Oscar?
The great players could play in any era. There's no doubt about that.
Cousy was first team All NBA when Weston Oscar were playing. I think he was first team All NBA. That's against Weston Oscar.
Well,
first team All NBA. Has Paul ever been first team All NBA?
Did Bob Cousy ever shoot over 40% from the field?
Well, we understand that.
Did he overshoot? Did he ever shoot over 40%?
Probably 39, 40%. Different kind of game.
Not once.
Not once. That's fair. He also had 29 assists in an NBA game.
Oh, well, he was being guarded by plumbers and firemen.
Thanks for watching.
Oh, my gosh. Okay, let's break this down. This is all because JJ Redick is saying that Chris Paul is in a conversation for greatest point guard, and Mad Dog felt like it was totally ridiculous, and he cites his finals performances and some other playoff performances where he completely melted down, which is understandable. I mean, in 2021, Chris Paul completely disappeared in that final series. He looked like a child possessed on the floor, just falling down, like he had terrible twos. But this happens a lot to Chris Paul. It's almost like he has anxiety because he's constantly choking in big playoff series. I mean, JJ Redick even tries to give him credit for the Lakers playoff series that he won with the Phoenix Suns. It was a first-round series. His problem is not the first round. His problem is getting to the Western Conference Finals, getting, an actual title. He hasn't done that in his storied career. Calling him the point guard, but never won a title and consistently comes up super small in playoff series. JJ Redick even cites there being 8 teams in the NBA and you only had to win 2 playoff series back when Bob Cousy was playing. Like, I get that, but I mean, was that the case in the 70s? Was that there were 17 teams in 1970 and they played 82 games. So imagine back when Bob Cousy was playing and there were only 8 teams in the league. Imagine that. Do you think that that's easier or actually harder? I personally think it's harder. To act as if somehow playing in a league where every single player is elite is easier is just crazy to me. When all the talent is saturated into 8 teams or even 17 teams, what that means is that only the most elite players would be in the league. And that the competition is even tougher. I mean, imagine having 3 games to advance in a series just to get to the finals. Can you imagine having to play Larry Bird 12 times a year versus twice? Or having to face the Celtics and Larry Bird every single week because there are only 8 teams? It's laughable to me that people will create narratives that don't even make any sense. The league is so watered down. NBA is currently operating in a way where, depending on what conference you're in, you'll only have to face the best team in the league twice a year. Imagine that. It sounds like it was a lot tougher back then, actually. And I'm sick of the new school and today's generation needing so much validation and recognition that they have to downplay accomplishments of the older generation instead of appreciating the path that was paved for them to get endorsement deals and better treatment as players in the league, things that the older generations were never afforded. Have some respect. It's disgusting and shameful. Growing up, I was taught to respect my elders. It doesn't mean that I have to let people walk all over me. But if someone older than me was critical of how I was doing something, I accepted their criticism and their feedback. It doesn't mean I need to action it, but it definitely doesn't mean that I need to reply to them with some sort of disrespectful manner or be insulting. I'll never forget when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had heavy criticism for LeBron when he made controversial comments about the vaccine. Reporters asked LeBron at the post-game press conference what his response to Kareem was. You know what he said? I don't have a response to Kareem. Some people thought that that was rude, but I didn't, because you don't always need to respond publicly with the same disrespect that you think you might have received. It was a smart move. Kareem was already receiving backlash from LeBron fans, and LeBron didn't need to make it worse. And I applaud him for taking the high road. I really do. The feud between the old school and the new school, it got worse when JJ Redick's comments went viral. Bob Cousy replied pretty quickly. Jerry West chimed in. You know, the Odd Couple, they spoke on Bob Cousy's comments, and they even played what he said exactly. And I thought his response was amazing. So I'm going to let you hear how the Odd Couple reacted.
The context. He was going at it with Chris Mad Dog Russo on First Take on ESPN. And Russo was saying Bob Cousy was better than Chris Paul. And JJ Redick was like, first of all, don't even bring me anybody before 1980.
See, there you go. There you go. That's my
I mean, I can bring you a few. I can bring you Wilt. I can bring you Russell. I can bring you.
But you can't totally dismiss everybody.
Right. But anyway, and he ended it. He got frustrated, I guess, with Russo's argument. And he said Cousy was playing against plumbers and firemen. Obviously, Rob, a reference to how back then a lot of NBA players worked the second job.
A lot of people did, and a lot of great players, Chris. Baseball players had winter jobs. They weren't making a gazillion dollars. They had, and you only got paid during the season. So a lot of these guys had jobs. So I remember Richie Hebner was a grave digger, Chris. I don't know if you remember him. He's a first baseman, played for the Pirates, the Mets. Richie Hebner. He dug graves in the offseason.
Wow. So anyway, that's what Redick said. And Bob Cousy, Rob, 93 years old, sounds like he's in great shape. He answered yesterday or the day before on Sirius NBA radio. Here he is.
But I will defend the firemen and the plumbers that he referenced. How about Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain, a guy named Elgin Baylor, Oscar Robertson, Jerry West wasn't too shabby. And we must have had the best firemen and plumbers on the planet at the time.
I love the answer from Cousy.
He sounds great. He sounds great.
For 93, my goodness. Yeah, he sounds awesome. Here's what I'll say, and I've said it before, Rob, but it bears repeating. This is my saying, and this is my real belief and philosophy. The superstars of any era would be.
Okay. So even if they were firemen and plumbers, to Cousy's point, they were the best firemen and plumbers that ever lived. For a moment, let's just talk about how horrible that comment was from JJ Redick. These men were firemen and they were plumbers because the NBA didn't pay them. So they had to work during their off season. The NBA also didn't provide trainers and facilities for them to stay in shape and work on their game. Think about that. Think about the lack of resources they had. But JJ Redick had every resource. He was a star in college, but an average role player at best in the NBA. He needed every advantage and every resource to be an average player. Listen to Jerry West's response to his disrespectful comments. I mean, honestly, Jerry West, may he rest in peace, the late, great Jerry West. I mean, he pretty much nailed it. And he was much rougher on JJ than Bob Cousy was.
JJ Redick, a current player who just recently retired, said that Bob Cousy played against firemen and plumbers, and Bob came on and wasn't too pleased. And you played in that era, and those guys set the table for us to be where we are today. And I was just interested in your thoughts on comments like that about your generation and the generations that paved the way.
Well, obviously the game is completely different. The athletes are completely different. And I know JJ just a little bit. He's a very smart kid and everything. Look, tell me what his career looked like. What did he do that determined games? He averaged what? He averaged 12 points a game in the league. Somewhere along the way, numbers count. At that point in time, the players aren't what they used to be. JJ certainly wasn't going to guard the elite players. And so you can nitpick anyone. And I'm not, the only reason I'm talking about him is because he was not an elite player, but he was a very good player. But he had a place on the team because of his ability to shoot the ball. But those players at that era, and again, that was when I started to see the difference in athleticism. My era, I was an athlete way before my time. I had a huge vertical. Probably no one in the league was much faster than me. And certainly the competitive part of it, I would put myself among any player that played the game. Today also, winning is all that matters. That's what drove me. And I subtly got better every year. We didn't have the facilities to get better. We had to work in the summers to support our family. But JJ should be very thankful that he's made as much money as he's made. And Bob Cousy, who I played against a couple of years, not very long, I just think it's very disrespectful myself.
The context. He was going.
Oh my gosh. I mean, Jerry West, he made some key statements here. And I think some of the statements that he made that stuck out to me, the first one, what did JJ do that determined games? What did he do that determined games? Okay, he was a good shooter. And did you win? As a role player, what did you do as a role player that determined games? Nothing. He certainly wasn't going to guard anybody. So, but he had a place on a team. Whoop-de-doo. Again, I'm going to say it. He was an average role player at best. His game in college did not translate to the NBA. Period. He did not live up to the hype at all. He never won anything in college or the NBA. Jerry also said something that was key to me that I'm going to touch upon later. And all that mattered was winning. Winning is what separates. It's what separates guys from being a good player to being a great player. That's what drove me, he says. They had to work in the summer to support their families. JJ should be very grateful that he made all that money off of our backs. That's what he's saying, that JJ made all of this money off the backs of the guys that came before him. And it's very disrespectful. And I mean, I couldn't have said it any better than Jerry West did. And, him having been an all-time great, having played, back in the days, having set the stage for competition, what winning should really look like and what it should feel like when you lose. Jerry West lost a lot. and it tore him up. All he wanted was to win, but he fought every year to get better and to compete. So I don't blame him for making these comments. To me, this amplified the beef between the old school and the new school of NBA players. That's why I felt like Anthony Edwards was in between a rock and a hard place. And, you know, Rob Parker from The Odd Couple, he actually talks with Aaron Torres about, you know, being a prisoner of the moment. And I'm going to play that soundbite for you because I thought that they both had some interesting things to say.
This is typical Aaron, prisoner of the moment, someone who's just not like everybody. There are people out here who think everything that happened yesterday is better than anything that's ever happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I feel so bad that even, and it happens a lot in the NBA, in order to try to make people feel better about the players, they have to downgrade or ridicule the past.
Sure.
JJ Redick did it. They're all plumbers and butchers. Everybody had a second job, JJ, back then, because they didn't make a lot of money, okay? So in the offseason, I remember Richie Hebner was a third baseman for the Mets. He was a grave digger in the offseason. That's how he made extra money. People didn't make that kind of money, so they had other jobs when they weren't playing pro sports. But the notion, the idea that these guys didn't have skills is just outrageous. It's ludicrous. And this is why, which is surprising to me, when I hear people say this. Well, I wasn't there. I didn't see it. Mm-hmm. So wait a minute, Aaron. We didn't see Babe Ruth play, but
he sucked.
But right, he sucked. Oh yeah, look at that fat guy. He looked like he was eating a hot dog when he was rounding first base. Right? We don't discount what he was able to accomplish during that time. We weren't around when Martin Luther King, or a lot of people weren't when Martin Luther King was around. Does that mean he wasn't a great man because we weren't here? Come
His
on, man.
That stunk. Would have never held up in 2024.
Exactly.
I have a dream. Boring. Get him off my TV. Yeah.
100%. I mean, what is this?
So, couple thoughts. So, first of all, your prisoner of the moment thing. This is a theory that I have had for a while. And we see it, by the way, with all these law, and I'm not trying to be political here. I know it's political season, but all these laws, all these things, and it's like, yeah, we tried this thing 30 years ago. It didn't work, and we've come full circle on it, right? Like, Rob, I'll give you an example. You know New York City well, right? A couple months ago, they had the National Guard in the subways because the subways were out of control. Well, guess what? That happened in the 1980s, and they figured out how to clean it up back then. But now everyone's like, no, you got to. The point I'm trying to make, everything is cyclical, but yes. But basketball, for some reason, I agree with you, is it feels like there is this need to denigrate the previous eras.
Yes.
And a couple things stand out. One, first of all, I just think it's dumb to compare eras, period, because I was telling Rob G this before the show, is like, yeah, Patrick Ewing was a back to the basket center, okay? Guess what? If Patrick Ewing was born in 2001 instead of 1961, he would have been shooting threes growing up. And so that would have been part.
Michael Jordan would have been shooting threes if that's what the game was.
You know what I was even thinking about today? Remember, LeBron wasn't a good three-point shooter when he came into the league because three-point shooting wasn't as important. And so it's dumb to compare eras. But it's also, by the way, can I say this? It's dumb to say that MJ was the only one with skill. Reggie Miller, not sure if you heard of him. Larry Bird, not sure if you heard of him. Ray Allen, by the way, was drafted in 95. So 95 by definition means you played in the 90s. Second best three-point shooter of all time. Larry Bird, you probably heard of him. By the way, Magic Johnson couldn't shoot. Doesn't mean he wasn't skilled. It's like, it's so stupid, but then it goes back to what you said, Rob. By the way, when you open a conversation by saying, yeah, I didn't really see it, so I shouldn't speak on it.
And then you speak on it.
And then you speak on it. Just don't say anything. Or, yeah, I don't know.
Okay. So, obviously, they discuss on The Odd Couple the prisoner of the moment. And I get that. But it's deeper than just, oh, this is what's trending now. Let's say this is the best ever because it's happening now. I think it's a little deeper than that. I think that NBA players today are very insecure about the brand of basketball they're playing. and how they're perceived by fans and the media. There's a general consensus that the league is no longer physical and that the regular season is basically a waste of time to even watch. Women's basketball is performing better than the playoffs and the NBA finals. Literally. The women's NCAA final had 20+ million viewers in comparison to the NBA finals. There were 40% less people watching. This decline has been happening since 1998. And we all know who played in that finals. It was Michael Jordan. 30+ million people watched the NBA finals in 1998. And every year since, there's been a decline. The NBA decided to remove defense from the league. Slowly but surely, it's been removed since the Spurs versus the Pistons NBA finals. But it wasn't because it was low scoring and highly physical. It was because they didn't have box office superstars with charisma and the it factor playing. The NBA is to blame for the lack of defense that players are allowed to play. The NBA is responsible for marketing the European players that have skill but lacked athleticism that would never make it in the 90s. They removed the defense so that the players with the charisma and the it factor could just do what they wanted on the floor and skate through to the finals. That's why defense was removed. But let's be for real. What's the difference between Vlade Divac and Jokic? Nothing. The game of basketball is not evolving as people say it is. It's devolving, where there's no physicality, no post game, barely a mid-range presence in the game with the exception of a few. Power forwards and centers no longer play in the paint. They play along the perimeter, yet can't even guard the perimeter. Lord have mercy. When Anthony Edwards said that, everyone says it's a lot tougher back then, that was telling to me when he said everyone says it's a lot tougher. What that said to me was that this is a huge topic amongst players in the league. It tells me that they sit around not only thinking about it at home to themselves, self-conscious about it, but they debate amongst one another and they are revolting against something that they didn't live through and they were never a part of. Yes, guys that play in the NBA have the right to speak on the game because they are pros. But why do they have the right to speak on something they never saw or played in or were a part of? To piggyback off LeBron James in 2020 after he won his last ring, give them their respect. Pay homage. Respect your elders. Don't run your mouth about things you have no idea about. But most importantly, don't let anyone use you to spread misinformation and false narratives to perpetuate the idea that Michael Jordan had zero competition during his era. Little do they know, they are only making Michael Jordan's legacy even greater. They are putting him on this insane pedestal, erasing everyone that ever existed in basketball. Since Michael Jordan won so much and was so dominant, that was really all that ever mattered, was winning. If you didn't win, you weren't even a thought. You didn't exist to fans or to the media. That's the real difference between today's game and every other amazing era in the past. It wasn't skill, it wasn't athleticism, IQ, or coaching. It was the will to win and to compete. Today, we celebrate losing. Today, we are forced to recognize players and teams that lose by finding the win. They have to find a win, whether it's a positive stat line or something personal that a player is doing off the court, which, by the way, nobody actually cares about that. I personally care about if they're winning. I care about what they're doing on the court. I don't care what school they built. I don't care what charity they donated to. They've been doing this since they've been getting real checks. But now we're creating analytics and stats that never existed before to find positive things to say about guys who are serial losers. We have to shout these things out in order to deflect from critical feedback about the brand of basketball being produced and the reasons for box office superstars not winning when they sit here and they orchestrate their teams and teammates in order to win titles. Yet we are told that championships don't matter. They are team accomplishments, right? Team accomplishments. Part of that makes sense to me. Basketball is a team sport, and any individual player that's a great player will lift their team. But they're only as great as how often and how far they lift their team. But that's the difference from any era since the inception of basketball versus today's era. I would say the past versus today's era, starting from 2010 and on, all that mattered was winning in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and even the early 2000s. But now, since about 2010, recognition is what matters. Celebrating the losers or hyped up players that never won anything, and several others. Participation trophies for going to the finals and losing, like LeBron. Recognition for showing up to the NBA with a dad bod, like Luka and James Harden. How do you show up to the NBA with a dad bod? I've never seen anything like that. That never happened in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s. Guys didn't show up to with a dad bod to the NBA and expect to win a title. That never happened. But that's what we have in Luka Doncic. That's what we saw in the Mavs, a completely unathletic player in the finals, getting fouled out, couldn't play defense, could barely run up and down the court, out of breath, throwing a tantrum. I'll leave you with this. Anthony Edwards was wrong for his comments, but this is something that young players are being brainwashed to believe. And guys like Isaiah Thomas didn't help because of the infighting that he's doing with his own era. He's been creating this opening for young guys to disrespect the 80s and 90s and eras before that. Right? JJ Redick said we're not even allowed to talk about anybody before the 80s. But I'm here to make everyone remember that there's 75 years of basketball. Let's not dismiss or revise the history because it just doesn't fit the narrative being perpetuated. That today's era is the best basketball we ever seen. I just don't think it was. And it's obvious that they're very insecure about that. And there's an agenda here. And I can go on and on and on about this topic. But I'm curious to know what you guys think about Anthony Edwards and the interview that he had with the Wall Street Journal. I'd like for you guys to drop me a line in the comment section. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Sports Tea. Have a great evening, everyone. Thanks for watching.